So please welcome our presenter, Jeff Kirkland, who will be speaking tonight.
Good evening. My name is Freeman, and I'm here to the history of the Kappa Omega Chapter of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. We are an international fraternity primarily created back in 1911. But let me just begin that we're so thankful that we're able to be here because locally, with so many chapters of our international fraternity, we had one in Harrisburg that is the Kappa Omega Chapter. That chapter was founded in January of 1923. And today we want to share with you that its connection because we represent Omega men from York, Dauphin, Lancaster, and other Central Pennsylvania communities right here are part of our fraternity. But I want to begin by telling you about how we came about as a fraternity international. The interesting story is that we're one of 9 other African-American fraternities or sororities. Now, fraternities have been around for centuries. In fact, the first we will find in history, there's fraternities go back to the 1700s, 1800s, and even to today. But the birth and the beginning of African-American based fraternities did not start until the early 1900s. So there were always many fraternities around, but just not African-American. But the story of fraternities in America really began with the first one, which was Kappa Phi Alpha fraternity at Cornell University in New York State. Then, of course, after that, there came other fraternities like the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity came about in the University of Indiana. But when you talk about those that follow, you're going to find that the history of them began and were rooted in all of our historical Black colleges and universities. In fact, the Omega Psi Phi fraternity is the first African-American fraternity and or sorority founded on a historically Black campus, Howard University. But to talk about the start of this fraternity, our fraternity in particular, I'd like to put things into context. The context is that we're talking about the time, taking yourself back in time to where 3 young students, Black students, who were born 2 years after slavery had ended. They were born in the 1890s. Here they are, growing up, teenagers now, attending Howard University in Washington, D.C. These 3 young students had an idea about what they wanted to build, what they felt was lacking, that they felt that many other institutions, white institutions and other things, such as an organization which allowed them to come together with like ideas, like attendance, and create their own organization, just as those that they had read about and heard about on many white universities throughout this nation. So these 3 young men on Howard's campus, there's a story that they told. It's a part of the history that although they were born in 1890, they were still teenagers. They felt that there was a need that they had to come together, build men, African-American men. Let's go back, as we said, colored men, Negro men, former slave generations later, needed to come together on this college campus. Because that was something that was not very common, you can imagine. And they were able to come to a Black institution like Howard University and any other institutions that were available. They came there and they began to recognize that they came for a purpose, not just for themselves, but for a purpose of establishing an organization that they knew needed to be built like other organizations were. So the story that I'm giving tonight is going to begin in 1911, when these 3 men on the campus of Howard University in Washington, D.C., one summer after coming home from their summer recess, and they were entering their junior year at Howard, they've been thinking about this kind of concept of having an organization where Negro men, Negro young men can come together, create a bond and a relationship, to have something that would be so impactful for them, not only their life on campus, but impactful for them when they leave that campus, go home to communities where they live or where they work. So it was one day when they came back on campus, they were walking across the campus, and they decided 2 students, Edgar A. Love and Dr. J. Cooper, while they were walking across the campus of Howard University, they started to approach other students on campus, men and women, male and female, and began having conversations with them. And from their conversations, they learned that some students were in college because they were sent there. Their family wanted to make sure they had the right opportunity. It was not common for Negro young men and women to go to college. So they want to make sure that they went there. But some came because they were sent. Some came there to get married. And some came there as something that they felt they needed to do or had to do for whatever their personal reason was. That's why they were in college. And that's why they went, in this particular case, to Howard University. But when you think about it, anyone else who's been to a college, some of those same thoughts cross the mind of every student, every time, in every university or college, whether you're black or white. You get an idea when you talk to people why they're there, what was their purpose for coming there. It can be so varied. But these three particular young men decided that they wanted to have a purpose, not just to get their education, but a purpose to study on something that they felt will be impactful for them and for their community at home and wherever they go. So from these conversations, they then came across another one who was a very strong friend of theirs. So they were these three young students, which happened to be Frank Cole. So these three students have always had a tight relationship once they had come to college. In fact, two of them, Frank Coleman and even Pastor Cooper, already had known each other before. But in college, they shared their conversations about what their thoughts and ideas were. They shared what they talked about with other young people on the campus that were hiring uniform. And they thought that what we found is a common theme, said that many people are here to prepare themselves for places of leadership as well. Leadership in their own community, as well as leadership in things in other places in society. They recognized at their time, there were many other prominent blacks in many leadership positions in many industry and government, so many things in education already. But they felt part of their purpose was to be preparing themselves not to have to do for a job, but to be leaders. So that's what they're thought about. They needed to develop something for them to be leaders. Now, they did a lot of research, as I mentioned, about fraternities, as well as their conversations with their students on campus. They began, their vision began to become stronger, became stronger. They believed that united college men with like spiritual beliefs, but these young men had a strong spiritual background. You look at the history where they came from, one of them, the parents, the father was a pastor. All of those men were strong in spirit. They were all very church-oriented. They came, which is very common in those generations. For those who particularly not only as slaves, but as their plantations of things, faith was kept many of them strong in what they had to go through, what they needed to do. So these were men of strong faith. Now, what they felt was that if they can get a collection of college men who were united, who had the same spiritual beliefs, the same ideas, the same vision, and leadership capabilities, they felt that if they came together to form a fraternity, it would be a fraternity that would inspire more educated men wherever they lived and wherever they began their careers to begin to go home and do things that would be uplifting the Negro race. It's all about not just themselves, but also about uplifting the Negro race. Now, after several weeks and months that followed, when they had these conversations and their ideas began to grow more and more and more, they began to visualize, they did more research, they had more conversation with many of the faculty members there and others on the campus, and that they decided, let's do this. Let's come together with a fraternity. And then on one Friday evening in 1911, inside the science building on Howard University's campus called Third Hill Hall now, but today it's called the Science Third Hill Hall. We used to call it just the science building. These three undergraduates, Edgar Amos Love, Oscar James Cooper, and Frank Coleman, they decided to meet with their friend and faculty advisor, Dr. Ernest E. Just, who was in charge of a well-renowned faculty member in the area of science at Howard University. He had been knowing what these young men were all about, what they wanted to do. So they entrusted him to help them to give them guidance and instruction and how allow them to talk with him about what do you think of this? How do you think it work? What is the approach in the process that we should go through to have this idea come to fruition of fraternity? So he was very a strong influence of that. And so what they decided to do at this meeting on this night that happened in the late evening, it just so happened it was a Friday night, and this we know the story spoke by some of our founders that it was raining, thunder, and lightning all over the place, but they were determined to come together to pull this thing together. So during that night, they come upon the name of the fraternity that they decided considered to call it Omega Psi Phi. And of course, that's Greek reference, because many organizations are turning black and white were based upon some Greek principles, using Greek symbols and things of that nature. So they too felt to stick with the same concept of having Greek symbols. But the name of the fraternity they came across was Omega Psi Phi. And what they did, they used 3 Greek letters, and that you can see on many of our states and on our signs and the symbols. There is the symbol of Omega, then there's the symbol of Psi, and the symbol of Phi. And what that is, those are just the first Greek letters of the phrase that turned out to translate in English to be friendship is essential to the soul. I apologize, I'm not able to recite it back to you in Greek, that's one of my esteemed brothers here to help get there. I believe it's Opilius, Vinicius, I can't think of it, but that's what it is. I used to be able to speak it in Greek, but no longer. So think that you don't practice, you lose. I just want to say that's exactly what our 3 Greek letters that represent the first letter of the phrases that actually say friendship is essential to the soul. So they recognize that that is a key part of friendship, of building a friendship, strengthening your soul, strengthening your spirit. That was key things about them. And they felt that if these men, if everybody was successful as an organization, they had to have that as a strong foundation, friendship. Because friendship is one of those kinds of relationships that can last forever, whether I see you or not, whether I hear from you or not. That friendship is almost like it's fresh and new. Anytime you run into one, you're going to be considered a strong, very faithful friend. But that's what they're thinking. Now, also, they decided upon this meeting to come up with not just the model of friendship and soul, but they also felt that we need to establish for our organization some strong principles that we will build upon and stand on. And those principles were 4: manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and upward. Those are the 4 cardinal principles that our fraternity is built upon. To this day, it has not changed. All it has meant more and more and got stronger and stronger, what it means to us and how it affects us, and how it impacts us individually. Now, this is the kind of thing that these men, and again, these are teenagers who are looking to put an organization like this, not grown men, teenagers who are thinking in the mindset of this is what we need to have, this is what we want to do, and this will benefit us and all other Negro men who come behind us on this campus. But their vision wasn't just this campus. They wanted to be they wanted it to be national. And that was a big challenge in those days. We're looking here, we're talking about 1909, 1910, 1911. And of course, there's so many things going on that are depicted in this hall here, all the events over centuries for the Negro people in this country, that there are so many things and so many obstacles, so many variables, things you had to navigate through to have anything, particularly what we call calling Negro men or those like the Negro boys together in an organization. So those are obstacles that they did have. So that was a key part of what they were doing. But once they got these ideas together, what they wanted to do, the principles, their model, and their name, they went back to think about the conversations they were having with students on campus. It was almost like doing a survey. What they did, they all came back and they remembered and they made notations of the conversation they had with young men on the campus. They made notations of young men who exemplify the cardinal principles of scholarship, manhood, perseverance, and uplift. They remember and made notes of those who they had conversations with were about friendships important to them and they're critical to their life and to their soul. Those were some of the characteristics they were looking at conversations with them, their spiritual beliefs, their like ideas, their ideas of attainment, their like ideas about leadership. Those were the things that these 3 young men that had conversations with their faculty advice about. This is the kind of people we want in this organization. So that same night, they pulled those notes out, they pulled that list out, and they began to identify and with discernment each of the people's names that they talked and thought about. What do you think that what these young men would fit into what we have? Also, what they will bring to this organization if they were invited to be a part of it. Because this fraternity and many fraternities like ours, at this stage in time, was not raising your hand, I want to join. It's about selection. In order for an organization to be strong, long-lasting, and built on a strong foundation, your membership key is selection. You have to make sure that you make the right choice, you make the right selection of those you want to link yourselves in. And we talked about the thing today when we were at the high school today. We talked about this, see a lot of on campuses, a lot of fraternities that you see them do things arm in arm. But when you think about those things were things that you think back to slavery, the links, the chains that were bound, that bounded them together, that they were like attainment of things, they had the right ideas, they had to think like, they had to work as a group and as a unit to survive and to thrive in whatever level of thriving it was at this time, in this situation. But those are the things that they talked about a lot and were key to them. So because they recognized and identified those young men that they thought that they would want to make a part of the organization, they still had a hurdle to defeat. They had to get their approval of the university. Now let's put this thing in perspective. We're talking about Washington, D.C. And let's keep in mind, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, Washington, D.C. was in the South. Not like we talk about one organization was founded in Indiana, another in Cornell, New York. Now we're talking about young, colored, Negro, Black men who want to get a university to approve for them and have an organization on their campus. Now, granted, most of the universities and colleges back then that were founded in the late 1880s and 90s, they were created and founded not by Black instructors and administrators. They were founded for the colors and Black people, but their administration was predominantly white over the years. They began to have Black faculty members, but the core of the administration was still white, very opening and receptive and supportive of the Negro students back then. But let's recognize there's an environment that they have to deal with, not just because you can't give the university being an isolated, self-sustaining organization, institution. There are other outside influences that have that to this day affect and influence what happens and how universities can grow and prosper. So those things are still important. But when they decided to go to the faculty, they recognized that the faculty was little concerned or leery of being supportive of the organization of these young Black men. That is what it could be, what it might be. There's a lot of thought and concern about what it might be, not what their vision was. They still have to continue to sell their vision. They still have to make, they continue to spoke, gain the confidence, the understanding of the faculty, as well as the administration. This is our goal. This is what we want to be about. This is not only important for young men, but it's important for this institution, this university, this campus, but not just for us. To raise the ideas of sticking together of education, leadership. You want to build leaders here. That's your purpose. Your purpose is about develop educated leaders to benefit not just their community, but to benefit this nation. So those are the concepts and ideas that they had. They were not swaying from it, but they had to go through many challenges because there was strong resistance. Finally, there was some breakthrough from the institution of the university, because the university and faculty had to vote to acknowledge to allow it to happen. But they did get some leeway when they were talking about a local campus. But that's not their vision. Their vision was national. They weren't going to stop, they were not going to stop working and presenting themselves and getting the faculty and the university administration to agree to them to establish a national fraternity. They persevered, which is interesting that one of the principles they talked about was perseverance. They persevered until finally they did get the vote from the faculty and the administration to let them establish themselves as a national organization. And then, of course, sometime later, in years or so, once anything else, they then became incorporated. But they were Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, a national fraternity. And to this day, we're international. Ghana, Bahamas, Germany, all over the nation, we have chapters, and many other Freeman organizations are now international all. But these are the challenges in those days and those times, just to get something started we had to face. But nevertheless, guided by their faith in God, their perseverance, and their determination, they saw that their young spirit were about to get a fraternity, establish a fraternity, and in fact, first fraternity on a historically Black college or university campus. So those are one of the things that distinguish us but there's so many other things that make it set up for all other sororities and fraternities to come about. But again, this was a challenge in the early 1900s. I cannot let people not recognize that this was not an easy task for the fraternity and all those sororities that came after. It was a challenge to overcome many of the obstacles. But they stood steadfast to their goal. They became a national fraternity, and they got the approval of the faculty, and then they became the first African American fraternity on the Kappa on a historical black college university. So that's why today we say we always hail our founders, Dr. Oscar J. Cooper, medical doctor, who just they had his home and his block in Philadelphia where he had his practice for decades named after him. And then there's Oscar J. Cooper, who was a strong man, who became who also left the university and went into the military. We had Bishop Edgar A. Love, Bishop of the AME Church. And of course, we also cannot forget our faculty advisor, Dr. Ernest E. Jackson, who in his own mind, he became to win the Nobel Prize in science. As a professor in the areas of science. So it took minds like those to have that strong sense of getting this thing done. But that's an idea of what the fraternity itself was. And today, it's so big, over 700 chapters across the world. We just happen to be one chapter in South Central Pennsylvania, the Kappa Omega Chapter that is sprung out of this fraternity. But I also want to share with you a few things before we talk about Kappa Omega, because what the fraternity was founded on, but also over these years, we've come up with mandated programs that this fraternity stands for. Some of them is what we call Achievement Week. And Achievement Week for us is that because one of our founders, in fact, locally, Dr. Stephen J. Lewis, a fraternity brother, and another founder, also a member of fraterner, Carter G. Woodson, who was strong, as people know, the founder of Black History, Week of Black History Month, was a member of our fraternity. One of our national conferences, he came together and encouraged the fraternity members. We have to stand strong to teach Negro history. Every member of this organization, every Black person should be out teaching Negro history, story and history of our people. So from the conversation, our fraternity internationally adopted that part of G.O.C. And fortunately for us, one of our local chapter founders, who was a dentist here in Harrisburg, was one that five-star committee put together this program, what we call Achievement Week. Every year we have Achievement Week, and it's around our founding history in November, because this is the program you may have heard about where we have, as a fraternity chapter, we have programs where we identify students of the year, presented with awards and certificates, citizens of the year, for all their work in the community, citizenship and what they do. We also have Omega Man of the Year and undergraduates of the year. In fact, several of our locally, you may know some of the names, some of our achievement people, citizens of the year, students of the year, are from here in your community. And some of them are from York High and other institutions around here. But those are just some of the programs we have with achievement. But we also have scholarships that we give out, and scholarship, because we're about scholarship, making sure that we continue to align the bloodline of building up the understanding, the knowledge, the leadership skills through scholarship of all of our communities. But we also have things of social action activities. Every organization like yours, we're involved in social action. We're involved in things that would uplift our communities. Whether there's so many different kinds of things, whether it's feeding the hungry, or there's helping the people who need things and have needs of things, or having voter education programs, or voter registration programs. There's so many things we have. We have talent hunt programs where we're introducing and allowing a venue for young people to put their talents on display. And those talents displayed locally also allow them to win awards represent within our chapter to go on to the district level, which represents during the second district states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. So our representatives are going to compete against other representatives from those other states and chapters. And again, they get a chance to go on to the national level. Each time they ascend, each time they get bigger and bigger and better awards for recognizing and honoring for their talent and their skills. But we also, as I mentioned, voter education programs. They're very active. Like our chapter has a life membership in the NAACP. They're also being strong promoters of being part of the NAACP. We also, as a fraternity internationally, we have an endowment fund that very contributes to for college education, and the down the park. But these are the things we do. But separate from that, the little local things that we do. Like we recently, due to COVID, we recently hooked up with our local health clinic that's in the community, in the neighborhood. So we help them to either do COVID testing, and we help them to do administer the test. In fact, we have a fraternity that was in Harrisburg, part of something where we also have allowed them to localize testing and giving shots for COVID at a fraternity test. So those are just some of these things. But the point is that this is this fraternity and how it came about. So let's talk about more locally. Once a student means, particularly black fraternity sororities, but other people don't recognize, distinguish us from white fraternity sororities, your job's not done once you do campus. That's why we have graduate chapters like ours. Because once you leave your campus, there's a transition you make to a nearby or local graduate chapter to continue to understand the fellowship and network with members of who have graduated and allow you to continue to be involved in active instead of just not remember the organization. But unlike many, because we've had people say this, oh, but I see you still, I see you still working with stuff from your college days, home. This is from my college days. We are graduate chapters. All the African American fraternity sororities have graduate chapters. The concept that the work does not stop here. You have to come back. You have to have organizations and other like-minded people do things in their own community. That's why there are graduate chapters. We'll all say this, we're all Omega men. We always say, well, Omega Psi Phi is the day we die. Because the idea is you always are a part or a member of the fraternity sorority. And you always have a responsibility for us, when you said, remember manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and love. You have to remember this is our foundation. This is what we came from. This is what we pledged to be, what we want to be. So those are the kinds of things. But it's because of that, once these men left their campuses after the founding of the fraternity in 1911, all of them went back and joined their professions, or they went back to graduate work, those special things. And that brings me to 1923. 6 men who left their respective universities and were members of the fraternity returned either their home or to where they established their profession. Some of those 6 men that I'm going to share with you today, they're all are pretty well known here in Central Pennsylvania. For example, those 6 men who founded our chapter was W. Carter Jr. He was came out, he was an attorney in Harrisburg. Dr. George W. Bowles, who is very prominent here in New York, along with medical doctor and the dentist, Dr. Antonio F. Riley, as well as in Harrisburg, they teamed up with the dentist, Dr. Stephen J. Lewis, Dr. Morris H. Layton, also from Harrisburg, Frank Jefferson, who was from Steelton. He was very strong in central Pennsylvania politics, particularly amongst the Black Republicans. He was known not just statewide, but nationally known as a very strong public speaker, promoting Blacks to be a part of the Republican Party, exercise your rights to vote, and continue to push for the needs and things of our communities for each and every one of us. These are the 6 men of our fraternity. When they came home, they decided to get together. We need to have a local chapter here. Yes, they were all several members here. There were other men who were Omega men in the communities as well. So many of them were pastors, many of them were other positions, many of them were educators. But what they wanted to do said, look, we need to establish a chapter here in Central Pennsylvania. So they petitioned the National Fraternity for a charter. And on January 28, 1923, the International Fraternity, by this national conference, approved the charter, Kappa Omega Charter for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That was the birth of the Kappa Omega Chapter here in Central Pennsylvania. And that's to this day, that's why just a week ago, as you know, we celebrated our 100th anniversary. It was the 100th anniversary celebration at the hotel in Harrisburg. But that's a big reason why we're out here spreading the news to the word about this fraternity, this chapter in Central Pennsylvania, because what we do here has impacted this community. But it's interesting for you to go to Harrisburg here, about the local record here in Harrisburg, how prominent those 2 in New York were. Dr. Bowles, when I was doing this research about that, Jeff and others have shared it with me, another contact, you know, I must give credit to Samantha Dorn. She has been one who's been guiding me and navigating where to find information. Well, my brother was Jeff Kirkland, Eric Kirkland, and many of the others here. But there's so much history that yet to be known about this place. And as if I'm looking around this room, I see so many things of people who have prominent here. And I'm so proud to see the one here, James Morgan, former police officer for the City of York Police Department, now a district justice here in York, PA, and a proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, and my fraternity was a member of Kappa Omega Chapter. Those are the kinds of things that a lot of people don't know who's amongst you. But that's why we want people to know who has been and is amongst you from our fraternity. That's important because a lot of times people don't recognize that there's so much talent, there's so much intelligence, there's such a history that you have that surrounding you on your block, in your church, in your school, in your company, in your medical needs, in your hospital. Those are the kinds of things why our purpose is to let the world know what's going on. But along with that, I just want to share with you some more that since 1923, those men have been very prominent in setting up the organization. They've been so prominent in attracting and bringing more members, more members, and more members. To the point that we know that there's so many members there and so many things have been happening since 1923. Just let me go through some of those things. For example, in 1912, Dr. Bowles, a prominent physician in your community here, led an organization that stressed education and vocational activities. It opened and operated a tobacco factory in New York. Where was that factory located in New York? Well, we will find a tobacco factory we found here in York. It was called the York Stripping Factory. He employed over 100 colored girls, making garments for destitute families and hospitals, which kept the young ladies off the streets. Let's look at 1915. Well, the Stephen J. Lewis and Harrisburg and other Omega men from here and around central Pennsylvania, the community members, they were successful in keeping that film, The Birth of a Nation. Many people may not know that was the KKK's marketing campaign to build up a strong KKK, to turn back, go back from Jim Crow, back to slavery. But these men were very strong in standing and pulling the communities together. That's why it was not in Lancaster, it didn't happen in Harrisburg, and it did not happen in York because of these men, other community leaders said, not here. We stand against this organization, stand against those purposes of the KKK. And then in 1917, many Kappa Omega men, and I don't want to name them because there's so many to name and that we're not all there, but so many of them were uniting the colored community to celebrate and honor young colored recruits, and particularly recruits who were training in the area with a reception and a picnic before leaving for their patriotic service in World War I. Many communities had these young men, but they also had young men that they recognized and honored them because so many of our fraternity members, Black soldiers, went off into World War I during these times and made them name for themselves. In 1919, in Harrisburg particularly, they became one of the first Eastern cities whose, and this is what they wrote in the newspaper in the 1919 edition. They were the first Eastern city whose colored colony that flows of a joint cooperation with the white YMCA and the white YWCA to have a colored Y. This happened in 1990. And that same effort was stored in articles where they pushed for the same kind of thing that happened in York. But once they felt that they could get it done in Harrisburg, they could get it in other places. So something had to set the stage for that to happen. And today, now there's still what's called the 4th Street Y in Harrisburg. Now they have what we call the Camp Curtin Y. It's still in existence today and thriving with its own level of membership right in the community of Uptown Harrisburg. So it's still thriving strong. Now, there were many meetings that we used to have, and one of the meetings that we used to have 1 year after we founded was right here in York at the home of Dr. Bowles. When I read the story about it, I could imagine what his home looked like because he talked about having these 25 to 30 Omega men in his home, having their meeting. And after the meeting, he put out this grand deal for everyone. They played cards, they talked, and then he had an orchestra for live music in his home to entertain the men from the region, but also Omega men that came from Philadelphia and from Maryland, just to join and be a part of the meeting of Kappa Omega here in Brother Bowles' home. So those are some of the things a lot of people don't recognize. But in the 30s and through the 60s, many of them made a medical profession here, York, and Lancaster. They were always united together and sharing ideas and helping each other, but stressing the importance of health amongst the Negro colored communities all over there. You know, they were druggists, they were pharmacists, there were so many others, and the big thing that they were big on, fighting tuberculosis. They were very strong in pushing TB testing, TB shots being administered in schools. Because many of the students that were black students and colored students, they did not have access to that. They pushed for those access to those types of shots for TB, and they saw and they perceived how the death rate was growing in the colored community. But once this thing was in place, the death rate began to decline. These are examples of not just men, but black students for the leadership of all community members. But we also talk about here, like our fraternity brother, Brother James Rowland. Brother James Rowland was a prominent attorney. In fact, he was a school board solicitor for Harrisburg Political School Board member, but he was also appointed to the State Board of Education. I'm not talking about Pennsylvania part of that. He became president and chairman for the State Board of Education. And in his role, he continued to address many things. He addressed the need for bilingual Spanish things to be taught as president of the School Board of Education. He also was strong and making sure that he spoke against the discriminatory educational system in Pennsylvania. That the educational system was diminishing and disrespected and was short of providing the rights and the needs of the education in public schools for the Negro community across Pennsylvania. And I knew Brother Rowland. He was a strong member of our chapter, and we knew how he spoke whenever he rose up in the meeting. He never backed down for his position was on things. He talked about being strong, being a man. He talked about scholarship. He talked about being persevering no matter what the cost. He talked about that. Again, I refer to our article. That's what so much was about. But he's the kind of thing when he spoke before the Pennsylvania Senate Committee, he said to them, our Pennsylvania Secretary of the Senate, he said, the citizens of the United States has brought up a system which has completely ignored the contributions of the coloration of this country. There are many Negroes who contributed to this country, but when history was written, they were either forgotten that there was a Negro involved or that they performed any act. These are the words that he spoke to a special committee of the Pennsylvania State Senate. That's why we still feel the same way today. If not us, who? If not now, when? But these are the kinds of things. Then we also had an opportunity to locally in 1976 and 1979, because Milledgeville University and Shippensburg University did not have Omega Psi Phi Chapter. Our local graduate chapter met with the university and worked with them to allow us to establish chapters on those undergraduate campuses. And another way for other men who have a place to get to become a part of an organization like ours here. And that's why there's so many other people organizations on campus throughout this country. But again, I want to talk about, there's so many things here. Even recently, just this past winter, our chapter was here with at York High, where we were feeding and had clothing the homeless in your community. This was a big thing back in December. Earlier this morning, we were at York High again, where the Divine Nine, which represents all the black fraternity sororities, have a panel discussion introducing our fraternity sorority to the students there, encouraging them. This is where it begins to be a part of this education, and not just to be an average student, to be a more and above average student, to be a part of this. These are the characteristics that we look for, and we felt in reception. I see my sister here; she was there. She knows that it did not fall on deaf ears. The questions they asked about scholarship, about studying, about what they need to do, it resonates because it's about reaching out and growing, not just for self, but for others. And those are the kinds of things that we did with today. It was also a very important thing together. I just wanted to say that those are the kinds of things, that's some of the things that it's not, there's a strong history here in Central Pennsylvania, a strong history that many of these men were already here, but when they decided to bring what they got from their undergraduate campus, that they felt it was necessary to have a strong chapter here. This is how the birth of Kappa Omega came about. And I just mentioned some of the names of those who were on the charter appeal for the trial. But there were so many men, as he said, within a year, it just within a year, but 25, 30 men just popped up. They were all around just waiting for the chapter to come. They can come together in units, together and strong, start doing things here in South Central Pennsylvania. That's a bit of the history. That's a bit of not only the attorney, but also the large chapter, Kappa Omega Chapter. And I'd like to turn it over now to our brother here, Jeff Kirkland, because there's so many of us here in York. Just click here.
Just imagine, this is up barely 50 years after the end of slavery, that these young men, these are teenagers again, came up with these principles that have lasted 100 years or more. Manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. These are principles that are interchangeable with each other. They're needed in order to uplift our community. The uplift in that really actually meant uplifting our community. And all these men worked at that. They had perfect examples back in those days. Brother Lance mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson. Yeah. I mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois because he had a principle he called the talent intent. And he believed that 10% of African American men were fortunate enough to move up into society, to gain education and all, and that we had a responsibility to uplift and reach back and uplift the rest of our community to show guidance to that community. So these men were right along in that vein there. You know, they wanted to uplift our community, they did everything they can. He mentioned many of the doctors. This was I wouldn't say it was an exclusive organization when it started out, but they had structure, they had requirements for you to be able to be, anybody just can't get it, become an Omega man. You know, you have to understand these principles and have to be willing to live up to these principles and then put you through some tests to ensure that you're the kind of man that they want in that organization. Back in the days, like Dr. Bowles and Dr. Riley and about it, you hear so many doctors, you know, lawyers, Benjamin Crump, you see him on TV and all like that. People, more often than not, when you see people highlighted across the nation and they're doing things across our nation, many of them are Omega men. I can go down through a list of people who have been members of Omega. But I wanted to talk about some of the local guys here in York.
Very good.
Can you guys see that? Like enough. But this is our latest chapter picture. We took maybe a few months ago. No, this was on the beginning of this year. Up at the state capitol. And it's that's just some of the men that members of the Kappa Omega that were able to make that photo and all. And Dr. George Bowles said about Dr. Bowles. Dr. Bowles was a giant in York history. This guy had a hand in setting up several organizations that lasted 100 years. The two of them that I'm most familiar with is Kappa Omega. Imagine setting up an organization that lasts for 100 years. The other one was Christmas Addicts. And when he set Christmas Addicts up, it was in almost the same vein as Kappa Omega. He said Christmas Addicts was set up as a character building organization. Not only building the character of those individual kids and students that came through there, but the character of York's Black community. Dr. Bowles also was instrumental in starting the NAACP here in York. I mean, so man, he was a busy man, you know, coming up through York there in that time. And I'm still in awe when I hear about these young men that set this up back in those years, 18, 19 years old. I want to highlight just a few. This is Dr. Bowles also. Many of you, most of you know that his grave is out at Lebanon Cemetery, the African American cemetery here in York, out in North York. And this was an occasion where most of those guys here, I think in that picture, are members of our York Omega men. And we took pictures around, and some of those guys have since moved from York, Bentley Ritter and Charles Patterson, and many of those others. But Dr. Bowles was an inspiration. I remember him as a young fellow. He was my grandfather's doctor, my grandmother's doctor. My grandmother called him Bowles. He used to tell my grandfather that you know, water and then walk. You know, you better watch what you're doing with Bowles. You might end up somewhere else and all, like, but she wasn't all that in favor and all, Bowles was well known, like I say, and respected in this community and beyond. He was a national figure. Bowles, again, a photo of illustrating our principles, perseverance, uplift, manhood, and scholarship. I mean, you can't go wrong with those principles. If you're living those principles there, you can't go wrong. And we try to instill that in the young folks that we come in contact with, to try and ensure that they're trying to uplift not only themselves, but our community also. This is the guy that he gave me a first scholarship out of Penn State, New York, back in 1968, Mr. Joe Douglas. And at that time, I had no idea he was an Omega man. But he pledged in, I think, 1946 at Purdue University. He ended up becoming an electrical engineer. He went to several other universities where he set up electrical engineering departments. I did not know that until just probably a month ago. I talked with his daughter. She said, definitely knew we were talking about Omega and different things, and Marion was her name. And she said, my dad was Omega. And I said, no, I did not. Even though I knew him, even though he gave me that scholarship and all, we've known each other over the years. He was an outspoken Black man. He spoke out way before it became fashionable to speak out on things like reparations, and equity and all those types of things. I have a photo of him where he was speaking before the Rotary Club back in 46. And no, that's 48. And he was speaking about why he felt reparations were in order. And in St. Paul's Lutheran Church, Dr. Richard Quick, pastor of that church, I went to school with his daughter, Peggy Quick, at this time and all. And he was another one of our giants there in our community. He worked with the NAACP, he was on Christmas Addicts, and everything that had to do with uplifting the community. Mr. Joe Douglas was involved in that. Yeah, not only me, but many other people's scholarships, not only to Penn State, but to other universities that he had connections with. So he was not only interested in building up himself and all, but he was pulling along, reaching back and giving back and bringing people along. Mr. Joe Douglas. I'll get this together soon. This is another guy. My brother said he knows him, knew him from back in the days. I didn't know Mr. Freeman personally, but Mr. Freeman was another educator. His son says in an article that was the pride and joy of being known as a teacher. When he became a coach, he played head baseball coach at Bluefield State College in West Virginia. And when he left college, he worked a little bit and went back to Bluefield University and became head of the health and physical education department at Bluefield State. And after he left Bluefield, he went to become a teacher and a department head at Howard University, where he got many people's scholarships there. His ideal thing was being known as a teacher. He was humbled by that name, and he wanted to be a teacher and all. Mr. Tillman Cease was just that, chairman of the Department of Health and Physical Education at Bluefield. His ties were strong to the community. He wanted to be uplifted. Going back. Again, just some of the criteria on him, on his son, his profession. Again, giants that we don't talk about or definitely learn about in Europe, but examples are essential. Mentors to our children and all coming up. If they knew or know about how hard these men work to get us to where we are and all, it would give them a sense of motivation, a sense of pride, a sense of purpose, where they know they should be doing the same thing, giving back to our community, uplifting our community. That's one of our aims, is to connect our students to this glorious history that we have. We have another young man that came up from Cador Street, where we were born, the Orr family. They had many people that were involved in other things. I'll show you some other ones as we move forward. But this is Mr. Henry Orr. And he was in college, Howard University, going to the military, World War II and all. And he ended up coming back, getting his graduate degree from Howard University, and became a scientist. I think it was, like it says, cancer research at the National Institute of Health. And all worked out. I think he was a scientist for 30 years or so, where he retired and ran another organization. I think he ran a travel agency or something at the time, something that was dear to his heart. The cancer research was his skill back then, and he was well known, but well respected, but little known, giant of our history, not only York's history, but Kappa Omega's history. Like Lance said earlier, Kappa Omega was, you never know until you know. You guys are out here and you're in the community uplifting, and sometimes you look at men and wonder what gave them the motivation and why they're doing that. And it's a principle of Kappa Omega, uplift. Many of us in this room, Mr. Frank Spell. They called him the Dipper. Howard University. He was one of the guys that went down there when Mr. Tillman Cease was down there at Howard University. And Frank was how he is, they called him the Dipper. He was an excellent ball player, but he was a leader on that team too. He became captain of the team. He led the team in many categories and all. And Frank came back here to York in a professional career, I think in banking and all, and joined up with Kappa Omega a few years back, and it's been a stalwart in that organization since then. At that time, Frank is still around here in York. And York's a better place for him. Definitely know this, my brother Kerry Kirkland. Kerry worked for President Bill Clinton. He ran a small business, United States Small Business Association for 5 states, where he was responsible for getting more than $16-17 million spent on developing black businesses across the state, across that 5-state area. He recently was working for Governor Wolf as a secretary. What did they call him? Not secretary. Deputy secretary. And and he's still in that field of uplifting black businesses. He was the head of diversity and equality and all across the state. Responsible for bringing millions of dollars to minority businesses across the state, right here in New York also. Brother John talked about his son's business and all. Gary helped out with many things here in the community. Went to South Africa to help Nelson Mandela set up some committees over there. And was instrumental in helping them to set up some equity processes after the freedom movement over there in South Africa. Gary actually tonight he's out with the new government. With Shapiro out in the area, he thought he might be able to make it here tonight, but he might not be able to make it, but he's continued to do this work. He was founder of the African American Political Roundtable here in New York. When he was in high school, even way back, they led a walkout at York High, where the high school after Martin Luther King was killed. And they shut the high school down and had protests and demanded. At that time, we didn't have Black history and those type of things, but he demanded. Their group demanded that they start having those type of curriculums and all. And Kerry, his life was spent in that field, uplifting our community, uplifting our family.
And also humanity, but he's also the founder and president of the American Contract Compliance Association. That was an organization, because I happen to be with him on that, and also be one of his board members. But that was an organization where went around the country where setting up workshops and seminars and training, because there was a time when there were a big push for companies and corporations and governments to provide some contracts to what we call minority and women businesses. So what Kerry did, what we would travel around the country doing, is we were going out so many seminars and training. How do you deal with this? How do you do that? How do you set these things up? How do you monitor the compliance? How do you self-establish those who are certified as what they say, minority home, women home? Kerry and his group at the time, I'm so proud to be able to be involved with and support on that, but that's something, and it's still effective today. It has not stopped. This was early 90s when this began, maybe 89, 90 when this was first formed. But there's another important thing of here. When Kerry went to, as Jeff mentioned, went to Africa, South Africa, and the point was Kerry used to say that even in Africa, he would wear some Omega paraphernalia, and he's being recognized in South Africa as Omega. So it was known. That's what I meant about the impact and the spread and understanding about no matter where you go, you have an influence. You're an influencer.
Influence. Certainly was that. He said he was really impressed with the children over there that still had light in their smile and their eyes, even in spite of the conditions that they were working, that they were living in, and all like that. It was encouraging. He said that they did not give up. like man said, he was the director and founder of the affirmative action office, the director of the affirmative action office in the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. Gary still continues that work today, and I'm so proud of being his brother, not only his blood brother, but his fraternity brother. You know, he definitely epitomized the cardinal principles of Omega. Yeah, that was some of his curriculum vitae there. As you see, he worked with Bill Clinton. He developed, we had a roundtable here during really gracious times here. Bill Clinton formed the President's Roundtable on Race. He was the principal organizer. He was the first director of the first African American director of the Pennsylvania State Democratic Party. Served as executive director of PA Democratic Party. You have to see this on school board, American Contract Compliance Administration, and the vice president of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, amongst many other things. I think I might have 3 or 4 pages of accomplishments and activities that Terry was involved in. He has unlimited energy, it seems like, when it comes to uplifting our community. And then this was, I think, one of the last pictures on there again. This was one of the older pictures of our group. One of the high schools up in Harrisburg, but men of distinguished character. Many of these men, doctors, school teachers. It's amazing to me also the number of school teachers that were involved, especially up in Kappa Omega. I mean, everybody knew the guys back there, Mr. West Gumby. I think Gumby speaks maybe 6 or 7 languages, you know, and all like that. We had guys in here that just amazed me, you know, worked with armaments and all the U.S. government. And many of these guys, like I say, made quite an impact there. And one of the things I like about Kappa Omega now, because they've made an effort in the past few years to broaden that perspective, not only just do things in Harrisburg, but let's start making an impact in our other communities where we are and all. We're hoping we do have quite a group of Omega men here in York. We're trying to strengthen that bond and bring them together so we can make the type of impact here that the Omega's making wherever they are, where they're at. He's my brother Eric. Eric's been a long time. He's one that encouraged me to get involved with Omega. Eric's been Omega, I think, almost for the 50 years yet, right? 48 years. Imagine 48 years he's been involved in that, and that's my younger brother. So that's why I knew what Omega was about. You know, schooled me and educated me on that. You know,
We travel with ACE, with the American Contract Compliance Association. Yeah, Eric too, he traveled with us. And one of the things that Kerry was instrumental with this organization, not just the training, but he and others negotiated with universities to offer to grant credit for college CEU credits for that, whether we went to Morgan, Stockton College, or many other universities around the country where we had University of Kentucky, Greenville State University, wherever we had the conferences. Before getting there, it's negotiated that credit will be given for these professionals coming in further professional development, not just to have hours, but to get credit for it, certification. So it became, got to the point that we're recognized national certification program, and this was Kerry started.
Master certification compliance for that organization, A2, going through those different universities. That was just an amazing accomplishment in itself to partner with so many universities to provide type of education to people who wanted to uplift across the nation. So again, I just can't brag about him for enough, but I'm bragging on Omega. I was so happy to get involved. I think when I went into Omega, Kappa Omega, I might have been one of the oldest guys that went over at the time. At that time,
we've had a member come into the fraternity after retiring from the military. He was recognized for an African American man, 61 years old, when he wanted to become a part of the fraternity. But he had drove through the military ranks as a private to retire as a colonel. So those accomplishments alone made it clear that he had lived our cardinal principles. But we also want to try to Randy Christie here with I was 63 years old when I joined.
quite an experience.
Yeah, that's when you were the oldest, but at that time was only 61.
Yeah, I think only 65. Like, Lance said, we have Randy Christie here, and Randy, ex-state police officer, and, force here in our community also, always providing updates to people in the community, to our students and our young folks. And, he's been a member of Omega, I think, for quite a few years. I think, did you go on the same line Kerry went on?
No.
Kerry to the guys also.
So many others, people like I mentioned earlier, there's Ron Martin, from who retired now from WGAL. There's the assistant superintendent at York High, Dr. George Fish. There's Clovis Gallen, basketball coach and teacher, educator up there, and now the principal. He still is up at York. He's leaving us in Harrisburg to come back home as an administrator. But there's so many more that you can mention. There's so many more. The numbers are there, but it's like you just don't know until somehow you see them either come out of some paraphernalia or you come out and find out that they are. That all along I've been knowing you. I never knew the deep kinds of things that you were doing and involved in, but that's okay. It's not so much that, just that you are involved in doing things. That's a key thing.
Yeah, like I said earlier, more often than not, you see a black man in this community, in any community, and they're working to uplift the community or working to improve things. More often than not, they're gonna make a man. That's no exaggeration. So we are proud of the organization, proud of the history, and like man said, we celebrated 100 years. Yes. And we had a very fine celebration in Harrisburg. And you guys can page through this book when you get a chance and opportunity. But 100 years of excellence, we call it greatness up here in Kappa Omega.
Thank you.
Can we make any closing remarks?
Yes. Barry, do you have any closing remarks for us to share?
Well, I just wanted to.
Please
make
do.
a closing remark.
Yes. But I do, to close this, I do want to thank you all for inviting us. This is an exciting and monumental experience. You know, I have a chance, we always say that there's not too many organizations created by young teenage men that last the test of time. And for us, an organization that's steady and consistent for 100 years in South Central Pennsylvania, we weathered the test of time, but we're here to stay. We're not going, all we're going to do is get bigger and stronger and have more of an uplift of our community, because that's what we're about. That's what we commit our lives to. That's what we make a promise to. We're going to continue working with that. But we also want to make sure that let York know that we're so proud of what you've got here, the history that you have here, the people that have been amongst you, that have made so much here. But you need to recognize and reach out and know, because I know there's so much of an effort out there nowadays to eliminate discussion about Negro history, Black history, and any other out of the way or not the way it used to be history. There's a strong push for that to be wiped out. Wiped out of, you can't take it out of memories, you can't take it out of experiences, but you can't take it out of anyone's spirit or soul, because it's embedded in everything. So you can try, but it'll never happen. Well, again, we thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, man. Brother Freeman, Brother Kirkland, thank you for that historical overview of the fraternity, of the love of the fraternity. As Brother Freeman stated, the work of Omega is never done. The men that they highlighted here today, our founders and even the founders of our local chapter, I always refer to them as pioneers, because when you think about what Brother Freeman was saying at that time in history, Dr. Bowles, I believe, was the first Black graduate for William Penn. You know, and so when you think about the conditions that they lived in during that time, these guys were academic giants, intellectual giants. They had so much courage. Uplift was about uplifting our people. These men were well organized, they were well managed, and they were extremely courageous. Speak truth to power. And so here we are, 100 years later. Now look around our community, and a lot of the same issues that these men fought for healthcare, housing, jobs, equity, diversity. If we say all the time we should learn by history, something we should be learning from what these men did to get us to where we are now, to make sure that 100 years from now, we're still not talking about back in our days, they were slums. For all the slums down. Urban renewal became a bad word for us, what these men stood up and fought for. So we have a lot of work to do. We want to continue to move Omega Psi Phi forward. Cardinal principles, the foundations that these men stood for are still relevant today. And I hope and pray that some of these men that we knew, we looked in the eyes, could feel their spirit. We know what they expected for us to accomplish. And I don't want to feel like we're letting them down. And so we have a lot of work to do to make more progress. Individually, we're doing fine. But collectively, we have a lot of work to do in our community, to uplift our community. So I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and sitting here listening about Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. And I'm gonna say this in conclusion. I learned about Omega Psi Phi when I was 5 years old. I was 5 years old. And to show you how important education and scholarship was, my brother Jeff will remember, we were born and raised on Door Street. Every Saturday, Kel Barry and them would deliver 2 black newspapers, Pittsburgh Courier and the Afro-American Sun. And in the middle of both of those publications, both sides was all about the historically black colleges and universities. What these fraternities were doing on these college campuses that he was talking about. What was happening. And believe it or not, our elders expected us to learn how to read at an early age. Because education was really important. Scholarship was one of our requirements. So I was reading these newspapers, and I said, I can relate to these. So I'm saying that to say that you never know how and when you impact a young mind. And so like Lance was saying, interacting with the kids at school today, spreading this message, you never know, it might spark something. So I really appreciate all you guys coming out, learning about our fraternity tonight. Thank you. Thank you.
But I just wanted to thank you for joining us this evening. I'm so grateful that you all were able to come out and hear our gentlemen speak about Kappa Omega and the legacy that they have within the Susquehanna Valley. So that's it for us tonight. Thank you for joining us in person and online, and we hope to see you back again.
Remember, we got basically talking with some workshop. I'm reading from. Awesome job there. You Brown 100 years, doing very cool. You know, you doing some years, yeah.